course we don't deserve it. So then God replies with this loving statement, listen, it's going to show my power. It's okay that you're helpless and no good. I'm going to use it to show my power so that we don't have to feel guilty about being no good. Do you get that? All right, now he told that to Pharaoh. Now there's, if you're negative to God, you're going to take that two ways. If you're positive to God, you're going to take that two ways. If you're negative to God, you're going to take that as an insult. Hi, I'm more powerful than you. But if you're positive to God, you're going to take that as a comfort. Oh, thank you, Dad, because I really need this. I really need my puniness to be of value to you. Okay? So that's why Paul brings that up. Because the power that was demonstrated with Pharaoh was the Exodus, and a whole lot of people believed in God because of it. So for the people positive to God, this whole idea of talking to Pharaoh was a wonderful thing, and in fact Pharaoh himself could have cashed in on it, but he was negative. All right? So that's all the context before we get into what the Calvinists misuse. And of course that takes us through verse 17, and now in verse 18 he's circling back to the original point he made. Therefore God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. Now think about that. Who would God want to harden? Nobody. If he has mercy on everybody, he's not going to want to harden anybody. But he's going to be accused by those negative to him of hardening him. It's all your fault, God. And that's what Paul is beginning to introduce, is that the Jews are hardened. Why are the Jews hardened? Chapters 9 through 11 in Romans are about the Jews being hardened. Well, who hardened them? They're God's chosen people. Well, they hardened themselves, just like Pharaoh did. So he's drawing this parallel. So when you get to verse 18, 9:18, which the Calvinists misuse, therefore God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. You have all that background that Paul was just explaining, and the Calvinists completely cut it off. They just look at the verse and say, therefore God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. Treating God as if he were capricious. As if that were godly to do and majestic. So you see, you almost, sometimes you don't need to be a Greek geek to screw it up. And in this case, they don't. So then they bring up this one, and I had so many debates with Calvinists on this verse. Romans 9:19. One of you, straw man, will say to me, then why does God still blame us who resists his will? See, there, the straw man that's accusing God in verse 19 is the same guy who's misreading 9:18. Oh, well, if he has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden, then it's all God's fault. And that's exactly what the Calvinists are saying, when they think instead they're showing God's majesty. No, they're depicting God as a sadist, as a tyrant. That's why people go against the Calvinists. And it's not the proper context for the passage. All right, now think about this. One of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? Okay, so Paul's next statement is like, okay, you want to be stupid and assume that God's arbitrary and that he's just forcing you. Okay, then how is it you're able to talk back to God if he's forcing you? See? Look at verse 9, Romans 9:20. But who are you, O man, to talk back to God? In other words, where does your ability to talk back to God come from if you're being forced? And then he gives the quintessential example from Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah chapter 2. Let's see. Is it Isaiah 2? It doesn't show that in here. It's probably Isaiah 2 or Isaiah 29. Shall the thing formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Okay, now in Isaiah 29, that's the quintessential potter and clay. Clay can't talk. Clay can't talk back. Clay can't say, why are you doing this to me? So if man was really forced to be negative, then he wouldn't be able to say, why are you doing this to me? So he's refuting the guy's claim that God is forcing him in Romans 9:20. You see that? Even in English you can see that. The guy in Romans 9:19 is saying, well, who can resist God? It's all God's fault. Okay, so then Paul retorts to the straw man with, well, who are you to talk back to God? Where did that ability come from? If you were just a piece of clay, you wouldn't have that ability. Duh. So the Calvies, it's like they turn off Romans 9:20, and they'll quote to you, well, see, nobody can resist God's will, Romans 9:19. Paul's reply that basically reminds the guy that he has free will is completely ignored by Calvinists. Now, because it's ignored by Calvinists, that's why they come up with this stuff whenever they read, like Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God. And they read that, they're looking at Romans 9, and they're misinterpreting Romans 9, so they're going to misinterpret the Exodus passages too. Alright? And therefore, when they see verses that are like, man is, and it's true, man's heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, who can know it? That's in Jeremiah. They're going to put this tyrannical spin on it. Because when they do that, they already have this idea that you can't believe unless God gives you the ability, and we saw how wrong that was. They already have this idea that God elects some and not others, with his blinders on. So they're going to misread those verses, and they never clue into the context. So they fail first-year seminary rules on hermeneutics. Because you get taught all this stuff in seminary. All right, and in fact, many teachers in Calvinism will keep on telling you, context, 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 and then they just ignore the context after they say that. So here you see a pretty graphic proof in Romans 9, even in translation, how they're doing that.